Imagine walking into a room you thought you knew inside and out, only to discover a drawer you never noticed before. A simple, unassuming drawer in a desk, tucked away behind stacks of papers and carefully curated memorabilia. Nothing about it screamed importance. Yet, behind that mundane facade was a secret so potent, so shocking, it had the potential to upend everything we believed we knew about one of the most scrutinized figures in modern history, Meghan Markle. What would you do if you found something inside that could rewrite someone's entire public narrative? Would you peek? Would you walk away? And more importantly, what if the truth inside was darker, more calculated, and more meticulously planned than anyone could imagine? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is not just a story about a drawer, a letter, or even one person. This is a story about ambition, strategy, and the lengths someone might go to secure not only status, but legacy. A story that threads through the glittering world of Hollywood, the hallowed halls of the British monarchy, and the prying eyes of a global media landscape. And at the center of it all is a handwritten letter addressed to a trusted confidant that may reveal a side of Meghan Markle the public has never seen, and perhaps was never meant to see. The letter's opening lines are simple enough, deceptively mundane. But as the ink runs across the page, a pattern emerges. Every word, every phrase, feels measured, almost surgical. By the end, a single sentence leaps off the page, underlined twice. This isn't about love, it's about legacy. Pause and let that sink in. What does that mean? Love? Was it ever really love? Or was the entire trajectory of Meghan's journey, from Hollywood actress to Duchess of Sussex, a calculated ascent towards something far more strategic? You may wonder how such a letter could exist, tucked away in what many assumed was a private, unremarkable drawer. How did it escape the notice of palace staff, security, and the millions who scrutinize every move she makes? The answer is as chilling as it is simple, because the content was never meant for public eyes. Only a handful of people ever glimpsed it, and those who did described it as unsettling, even frightening in its clarity. What was meant to be private became explosive when the drawer was finally opened, revealing plans, ambitions, and insights that paint a portrait of Meghan unlike anything tabloids, documentaries, or interviews have ever suggested. And then there's the FBI. Yes, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Normally associated with criminal investigations, cybersecurity, and national security, the involvement of such an agency in something that seems, at first glance, personal and private, is baffling. Why would the FBI be examining a letter in the personal effects of a member of the British royal family? The answers, as you'll soon see, are anything but ordinary. There are questions of international jurisdiction, high-profile leaks, and a trail of breadcrumbs that leads back to Hollywood, global media outlets, and strategies designed to shape public perception on a scale few could ever manage. Before we go any further, let's pause and consider the stakes. This is more than just palace intrigue or celebrity gossip. This letter, hidden away in a forgotten drawer, suggests a deliberate orchestration of events that would influence millions of people worldwide. Every interview, every public appearance, every photo op, potentially part of a larger plan. And when you begin to connect the dots, the picture that emerges is both brilliant in its execution and chilling in its implications. So, what exactly did this letter contain? The specifics are jaw-dropping, but to understand them, we first need to trace the journey that led to its creation. A journey from the bright lights of Los Angeles to the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace. A journey fueled by ambition, shaped by careful calculation, and executed with an awareness of the media's power that most of us can scarcely imagine. Along the way, allies were chosen, strategies developed, and a persona carefully curated to achieve one goal. Entry into royalty, and not just any entry, but one that would maximize influence, status, and ultimately, control over her narrative on a global stage. Imagine reading a document that breaks down the steps of a life as if it were a chessboard. Every move considered, every outcome anticipated, every public reaction predicted. This was not the musings of a romantic dreamer. This was a blueprint, meticulously planned and deliberately executed. And at its core, the letter challenges everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle's motivations, her relationships, and her rise to prominence. By now, you're probably wondering how much of this is true. How much is rumor? And how much is verifiable fact? That's exactly the tension that drives this story. Every claim, every quote, every revelation will be examined, with sources, insider accounts, and documented events woven together to present a narrative that is both compelling and, at times, deeply unsettling. And while some may recoil at the audacity of the plan, others may recognize a methodical intelligence behind the actions, a determination to shape destiny on her own terms, regardless of the personal cost or public perception. What makes this even more gripping is the timing. The world is watching, yet perhaps not watching closely enough. In an era of viral videos, instant social media reactions, and 24-hour news cycles, the subtleties of personal strategy can be overlooked. The drawer remained unnoticed for years, the letter untouched, until finally, the layers began to peel away, revealing secrets hidden in plain sight. And once those secrets started to leak, the ripples were immediate, profound, and impossible to contain. But the story doesn't end with the letter's discovery. No, in many ways, that is just the beginning. Because every revelation brings new questions. Who else knew? Who benefited? And perhaps most chilling of all, what does it mean for the future? For the monarchy? For the media? For anyone who ever believed they truly understood the Duchess of Sussex? You may ask yourself, why would someone plan so meticulously, so deliberately, for decades of life before marriage? And the answer, as unsettling as it is, lies in the concept of legacy. Not fame, not love, not personal satisfaction, but legacy. To leave a mark, to shape perception, to control narrative. It is a force that can drive decisions in ways that are hard to fathom. And yet, when seen through the lens of the letter, suddenly everything begins to make sense. So, as we begin this journey, prepare yourself for revelations that challenge assumptions, for stories that shock, and for insights that will keep you questioning everything you thought you knew. The drawer has been opened, the letter has been read, and the secrets within are ready to be revealed, piece by piece. But the most astonishing elements, the twists that will make your jaw drop, are still to come. And here is the question you must carry with you as we move forward. If someone planned their life with such precision, such calculated ambition, what does it say about everything else we've witnessed? About every interview, every appearance, every public statement? And what, ultimately, does it reveal about the lengths people will go to secure not just their place in history, but the control of how history remembers them? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if you stumbled upon something no one else had noticed for years? A secret that had been quietly hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered? That is exactly what happened when the drawer in Meghan Markle's private study was finally opened. It was unremarkable on the surface, an ordinary wooden compartment in a sleek, modern desk, but the mystery lay not in its exterior, but in what it had concealed for so long. The discovery began as a routine office inspection, an ordinary inventory check that, for the first time in years, brought attention to a part of the room staff had consistently overlooked. Picture the scene. The room was quiet, the kind of hush that makes even small sounds echo. A staff member noticed the drawer while organizing documents. At first glance, it seemed inconsequential. But there was something different about this one, an almost imperceptible sign of care or secrecy. Perhaps it was the way the wood seemed slightly worn, suggesting it had been used often but never fully emptied. Or maybe it was simply intuition. You know that gut feeling that whispers, something isn't right. That's exactly what led to the hand pausing over the brass handle, the moment hanging thick in the air. The act of opening it felt monumental. A key had been carefully tucked away, and when it finally turned in the lock, it was as if a door to another life had swung open. Inside, stacked neatly, were envelopes, folded documents, and one small, unassuming envelope that would later become the focal point of global fascination. There was no fanfare. No one else was in the room. Just the quiet realization that whatever lay inside could change everything. It's hard to overstate the tension in that moment. Imagine holding in your hands a piece of someone else's mind, a plan, a secret, an ambition, without knowing the scale or implications. For years, Meghan Markle had been under public scrutiny, every move analyzed, every word dissected. Yet here, hidden behind a locked drawer, was something untouched by the press, untouched by public opinion, untouched even by the palace's closest aides. This was raw, unfiltered insight, and it was about to surface in a way that no one could have predicted. When the envelope was lifted, the first thing noticed was its careful handwriting. Elegant, deliberate, each letter precise. The kind of penmanship that suggests thoughtfulness, even obsession. Whoever wrote this had intention behind every stroke. And then, there was the weight of anticipation. Opening it felt like cracking open a window into a private strategy so meticulously constructed that it blurred the lines between personal ambition and calculated power play. The drawer itself told a story. How long had it gone unnoticed? How many eyes had passed over it without catching the treasure or the trap inside? These were questions that no one could answer with certainty. But the presence of a single, hidden letter suggested that someone wanted this message to survive, to remain concealed until the right moment. That raises an intriguing question. Why hide something so important in the first place? What does it say about trust, secrecy, and the lengths someone might go to protect or control their narrative? And here's where the story deepens. Because the drawer was not just about hiding a letter, it was about controlling access, controlling perception. Whoever designed this system understood the power of discovery. They knew that if someone ever found this, the impact would be explosive. There is a deliberate drama to it, an awareness that secrecy itself can be a tool. And for anyone who has ever wondered how carefully curated public figures construct their private worlds, this drawer is a perfect example. Unassuming, overlooked, yet capable of holding revelations that could shift public understanding overnight. The envelope was removed, but before it was opened, the room seemed to hold its breath. Every movement mattered. The slightest rustle of paper was amplified. Imagine being the first person to touch something that could alter history, that could illuminate intentions and strategies hidden from the world for years. You know the feeling of uncovering a long-lost letter or a secret diary. Now imagine that diary isn't just personal, it's strategic. Every word could have ramifications for a global audience. Every sentence could challenge assumptions you didn't even know you were holding. At that moment, the implications were clear, even if no one yet understood the full picture. This was not simply a piece of correspondence. It was a blueprint. The drawer, the envelope, the handwriting, it all pointed to a mind at work, carefully plotting steps far beyond what any casual observer could imagine. The notion that one letter could outline ambitions so far-reaching, so audacious, was astonishing. And yet, that's precisely what lay in front of the person who first lifted it. Now imagine holding that letter in your hands. Could you have put it down? Could you have ignored it? For the first time, the story of Meghan Markle was not being told through headlines or interviews. It was being told in the author's own voice, carefully chosen words, deliberate underlining, and strategic phrasing. Every detail mattered, and as the letter was gently unfolded, the tension in the room intensified. What would it say? Would it confirm suspicions, contradict public perception, or rewrite everything the world thought it knew? What makes this discovery even more riveting is how unassuming it was. A drawer, a letter, that's it. Yet the consequences were monumental. For years, Meghan's public persona had been constructed with precision. Interviews, public appearances, philanthropic efforts. Each move observed, analyzed, and critiqued. But here, hidden in a drawer, was a glimpse of the underlying strategy. And it immediately became clear, this was more than personal reflection. This was a calculated plan, a map outlining intentions that stretched far beyond love or personal ambition. Questions began to form, almost instantaneously. Who else had known about this letter? How long had it been kept? What would happen if the contents became public? These were not idle curiosities. They were critical inquiries, because the answers could redefine the narrative surrounding one of the most talked-about figures of our time. Every assumption, every interpretation of Meghan's rise to prominence could be reframed in an instant. And as the first lines of the letter were read, it became chillingly clear that this was precisely what the author intended. The drawer's discovery also raises deeper questions about secrecy and trust. How often do public figures keep plans hidden from those closest to them? How much of what we see is carefully curated versus genuinely spontaneous? And perhaps the most provocative question: if someone can construct a plan so meticulously, so effectively, How much of their public story is ever truly theirs, and how much is designed to influence, manipulate, or control perception? And then there's the symbolism of the act itself. A locked drawer, patiently waiting. A letter, deliberately concealed. The discovery is almost theatrical, a narrative device in real life. It is suspense built into a mundane object, a secret waiting to be unveiled. And it begs the ultimate question for the audience. If such carefully orchestrated strategies exist behind closed doors, what other truths about public figures are waiting, quietly, to be discovered? But as the drawer was finally emptied and the envelope carefully lifted, one thought loomed larger than any other. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it feel like to hold a secret that was never meant to see the light of day? That was the sensation the first person experienced when they finally lifted the envelope from Meghan Markle's long-forgotten drawer. At first, it seemed ordinary, just a piece of paper folded neatly, the kind you might send to a friend or confidant. But as soon as the handwriting came into focus, something changed. There was a precision to it, a careful deliberation in every stroke of the pen. The letters weren't rushed, weren't casual, they were deliberate. Every word seemed calculated, every phrase carefully weighed. And then, almost immediately, a sense of unease began to creep in. The envelope had been sent to a former Hollywood confidant, someone who had shared in the intimate details of Meghan's life before she became the Duchess of Sussex. That connection alone was significant. It suggested that this was more than a diary entry or personal reflection. It was a message, a map of intentions sent to someone trusted, someone capable of understanding the subtleties behind each phrase. And yet, the choice to hide it in a drawer, to keep it untouched for years, implied secrecy. It was private, but it was also meant to be discovered eventually, under the right circumstances. When the envelope was opened, the first sight of the letter itself was enough to send a chill through the room. The paper was pristine, high quality, and folded with care. The handwriting was elegant, flowing yet deliberate, almost like a performer rehearsing every move for a stage that only they could see. But the real shock came as the words were read. The opening lines were deceptively simple, casual even, giving no hint of the calculated ambition embedded within. It was only as one read further that the pattern began to emerge, the hidden strategy slowly revealing itself. The most striking detail, immediately noticeable, was the sentence underlined not once, but twice. This isn't about love, it's about legacy. Pause for a moment and imagine that statement. Two underlines, like a warning or a spotlight, demanding attention. What could it mean? Was it a reflection of personal priorities? A declaration of intent? Or was it a deliberate message to the confidant, meant to convey the seriousness of the plan in a way that words alone could not? Whatever the answer, the phrase immediately shifted the lens through which the entire letter had to be read. Every subsequent paragraph, every carefully constructed sentence, seemed to orbit around that central declaration. There were other clues, subtle but significant, hidden in the choice of words, the rhythm of the writing, the emphases placed on certain ideas. Lines that seemed innocuous at first glance began to read differently under scrutiny. Every mention of opportunity, timing, and influence hinted at a meticulous understanding of social dynamics and media power. This wasn't casual ambition. This was a blueprint for navigating and manipulating environments at the highest levels, designed to maximize visibility and impact. As the reader continued, it became increasingly clear that the letter detailed a strategic plan. How to gain access to the monarchy, how to cultivate public favor, and how to position oneself as both a participant in royal tradition and a disruptor with influence beyond the palace walls. There was a precision to it that was almost surgical, a calculation of steps and outcomes that suggested foresight far beyond what casual observation might allow. Every move appeared premeditated, every relationship considered. It was as if the author had visualized a complex chessboard, with each piece carefully placed to achieve a desired outcome. The implications of this are staggering. Consider for a moment the level of awareness and self-discipline required to construct such a plan. This was not the impulsive act of someone seeking attention. It was a long-term strategy, a deliberate orchestration of events designed to unfold over years. And here it was, preserved in a single letter, untouched and hidden, waiting to reveal the thought process behind a public persona that millions around the world had come to know, perhaps incompletely or even incorrectly. The emotional impact on the first reader was immediate. Shock, disbelief, a sense of witnessing something profoundly intimate and yet undeniably calculated. Imagine holding in your hands a piece of someone else's mind, knowing that what you are reading was never intended for public eyes, yet contains revelations that could upend everything people thought they knew. And then consider the gravity of understanding that this wasn't a fleeting plan or an abstract hope. It was a deliberate roadmap, carefully articulated and preserved for the confidant, and now, inadvertently, for the world. As the letter continued, the subtleties became even more striking. There were moments of vulnerability, yes, but they were carefully balanced with assertive declarations and strategic intent. Mentions of personal connections, public perception, and influence all pointed toward a singular objective, not simply to become part of the royal family, but to control the narrative surrounding that integration and to use the position as leverage for broader global influence. It was ambition disguised as reflection, strategy disguised as sentiment. And yet, there were contradictions woven into the text, hints of tension between personal desire and calculated purpose. Lines that spoke of affection and human connection contrasted sharply with the repeated emphasis on legacy and power. It was as though the author was simultaneously playing multiple roles: the friend, the aspirant, the strategist, and the performer. This duality created an emotional tension that made the letter both compelling and unsettling, inviting the reader to question not just the intentions of the author, but the very nature of ambition when intertwined with personal relationships. Direct questions began to emerge naturally as one read. How much of what the public saw was genuine? How much was orchestrated for maximum effect? And perhaps most unnerving of all, if someone can plan their ascent with such meticulous attention, what does that mean for the authenticity of their every move? Every appearance, every interview, every carefully framed public statement? The letter suggested that the boundaries between personal choice and strategic performance were not just blurred, they were almost irrelevant in the pursuit of legacy. As the first reader reached the end of the initial section of the letter, the tension in the room was palpable. The words had created a sense of anticipation, a feeling that the most significant revelations were still to come. And that anticipation was no accident. The letter was structured to build suspense, to layer information in a way that gradually revealed depth and complexity, ensuring that the reader remained engaged, emotionally invested, and increasingly unsettled. And then came the final line of this first section, another phrase that underscored the central theme: the careful orchestration of life for influence and legacy rather than personal fulfillment. The impact was immediate. Every thought, every emotion, every reaction had to be recalibrated in light of this insight. It reframed everything: the Hollywood career, the royal courtship, the public persona. Suddenly, patterns that had seemed coincidental now appeared deliberate. Every carefully timed appearance, every media interaction, every public statement could be seen not as isolated events, but as calculated steps along a path laid out years before. So what happens when a letter like this comes to light? How does one reconcile the image the world has been shown with the intricate, strategic mind revealed on a single sheet of paper? These are the questions that make the discovery of the letter so extraordinary, and why the drawer that housed it becomes almost symbolic. Hidden, overlooked, yet containing the key to understanding a narrative that had been carefully managed for years. And as the reader folded the letter back into its envelope, a chilling realization set in. This was only the beginning. The initial glimpse had revealed strategy, ambition, and intent, but the most astonishing, shocking, and transformative revelations were still waiting to be uncovered. What would be found in the pages to come? How far-reaching were the plans detailed in that letter? And perhaps most provocatively, what did this mean for everyone who thought they truly understood Meghan Markle's story? The answers were still ahead, and what came next would force the world to look at her life, choices, and public image in a completely new light. Could Hollywood have been the perfect rehearsal for a future in royalty? It sounds almost absurd at first, a world of bright lights, red carpets, and scripted narratives preparing someone for palace life. Yet, as the letter begins to unfold, it becomes clear that Meghan Markle's years in Los Angeles were far from incidental. They were formative, calculated, and, in hindsight, crucial to the path she would eventually take. Every audition, every networking event, every public appearance in Hollywood appears less like happenstance and more like a deliberate training ground for life in the global spotlight. Think about the skills required to navigate Hollywood at that level: media savvy, timing, public perception management, and understanding how to project an image that resonates on a global scale. These are not trivial abilities. They are the tools of someone who knows how to shape narrative and control attention. And as the letter hints, these skills were not developed in isolation. Connections were cultivated carefully, relationships maintained selectively, and visibility managed strategically. Every photograph, every interview, every public appearance became a piece of the larger puzzle, training for the moment when her stage would shift from Hollywood premieres to royal engagements. There's a particular section of the letter that illustrates this point with chilling clarity. The words convey awareness of opportunity long before it existed. It references events, contacts, and strategic relationships in the entertainment industry as if they were stepping stones, each one carefully chosen to position the author for what was to come. Imagine the foresight: a young actress mapping out not just a career in television or film, but a pathway toward influence, recognition, and ultimately, entry into one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world. That level of foresight, when combined with ambition, is staggering. The letter also reveals the duality of life in Hollywood and the preparation it provided for palace life. On one hand, there were social dynamics to navigate, networking with high-profile individuals, understanding media cycles, and mastering public relations. On the other hand, there was a subtle training in performance: how to present oneself, how to project confidence, charm, and authenticity, even when every action is being dissected and evaluated. The skills of the entertainment world, it seems, translated seamlessly into the skills required to navigate a royal court, where appearances are everything and missteps are magnified exponentially. As the reader continues, the parallels between Hollywood and royalty become impossible to ignore. In both worlds, reputation is currency, perception is power, and timing is everything. The letter points to a calculated awareness of these dynamics, showing how lessons learned in Hollywood could be applied with surgical precision in the royal arena. Each move was not just about career advancement, but about creating a persona capable of navigating complex social hierarchies while simultaneously attracting global attention. What's striking is how the letter frames ambition as a blend of personal desire and strategic calculation. It doesn't present these goals as reckless or impulsive, but as a measured process, almost like a blueprint for success. There's an acknowledgement of the emotional cost, too. Sacrifices would be required, relationships carefully managed, and public image constantly curated. The letter balances ambition with introspection, revealing someone who is keenly aware of the challenges inherent in climbing to the top of both Hollywood and, eventually, the royal ladder. At the same time, the letter is not devoid of vulnerability. It acknowledges the risks of pursuing such a path: public scrutiny, criticism, and the pressure of constant observation. But even this vulnerability is framed strategically. It is not indulgent or self-pitying. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of obstacles to be anticipated and overcome. The message is clear: every challenge has a counter-strategy, every potential setback a way forward. It's this meticulous planning that elevates the letter from a personal note to a document of calculated foresight. There's also a fascinating discussion in the letter about the influence of media. The author demonstrates an advanced understanding of how stories are shaped, spread, and consumed. References to journalists, social media platforms, and public perception reveal an almost uncanny ability to predict how narratives would unfold, how they could be guided, and how influence could be amplified. In essence, Hollywood was not just a career, it was an education in narrative management, a proving ground for someone who would later navigate an even more complex and scrutinized stage: the global media frenzy surrounding the British monarchy. The emotional beats in this section of the letter are equally compelling. It juxtaposes ambition with moments of reflection, moments of doubt, with a resolute focus on the end goal. This tension makes the narrative relatable, even as it reveals a level of calculated intent that can feel unsettling. It invites the reader to grapple with contradictions, admiration for strategic intelligence versus unease at the level of orchestration. And as each page unfolds, the narrative tension builds, making it impossible to look away. The letter also foreshadows the next stage of life with remarkable prescience. Hollywood was a platform, yes, but the ultimate goal was clearly stated: integration into royal life. And not just integration, but positioning oneself in a way that maximized influence and visibility while maintaining control over personal narrative. Every lesson learned, every skill acquired, every public interaction in Hollywood was a stepping stone, each one carefully considered, each one adding to the foundation of a meticulously constructed plan. Direct questions begin to form for the audience. Could such meticulous planning ever be seen as purely ambition? Is it manipulation, or is it simply strategic foresight? How much of what we admire or criticize in public figures is the result of long-term planning rather than spontaneous choice? These questions linger because the letter doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, it presents a complex portrait of someone navigating a world where every decision matters and every misstep can have global consequences. By the end of this section, the reader is left with a heightened sense of anticipation. The narrative threads of Hollywood experience, strategic planning, and personal ambition converge to create a portrait that is as fascinating as it is disconcerting. The stage is set for the next chapter of life, a transition from the entertainment industry to the corridors of power, where the stakes are higher and the audience is infinitely larger. And as the letter hints, the most compelling elements are still to come. The confidant for whom the letter was written would soon realize that the next steps outlined were not merely career moves. They were moves that would redefine relationships, influence public perception, and challenge centuries of tradition. Every calculated decision, every subtle manipulation, every carefully considered public appearance was about to intersect with the complex and highly scrutinized world of royalty. But what the confidant saw in the following pages would push the boundaries of expectation even further, and the true extent of the plan, the depth of its strategy, would soon leave even the most experienced observers stunned. Who do you turn to when you're crafting a plan so intricate that it cannot be shared with just anyone? For Meghan Markle, according to the letter, that person was a trusted Hollywood confidant, someone who had witnessed her rise, understood her ambitions, and, most importantly, could be relied upon to keep secrets. But what happens when the confidant is suddenly thrust into the center of a revelation that could change everything we thought we knew about a public figure? That is the story that unfolds as the letter begins to be read aloud, shared, and dissected. From the very first lines, the confidant was struck by the clarity of the intentions expressed. This was not a casual note. It was a blueprint, a roadmap, and a declaration all rolled into one. There was precision in every word, a sense of foresight that suggested the author had spent years anticipating outcomes, predicting obstacles, and crafting contingencies. The confidant immediately sensed the gravity of the letter, not just as a personal communication, but as a document that, if revealed, could have far-reaching implications. The confidant recalls a moment of disbelief when encountering the sentence underlined twice. This isn't about love, it's about legacy. To them, it was both shocking and revealing. It signaled a prioritization of influence and status over personal attachment, a deliberate calculation that reframed the narrative around Meghan's journey. Every subsequent paragraph seemed to echo that central theme, revealing a sophisticated understanding of how ambition, public perception, and opportunity intersect. The confidant realized that the letter wasn't simply sharing thoughts. It was presenting a strategy that had been carefully honed over years. In conversations about the letter, the confidant has described a sense of awe mixed with unease. There is admiration for the level of intelligence and planning, but also a recognition of the emotional and ethical complexity embedded within it. Here was someone who had anticipated public scrutiny, prepared responses, and designed interactions, all to achieve a long-term goal that transcended personal satisfaction. It was ambition executed with precision, but it was also calculated in a way that could make even those closest to the author question their understanding of her motives. One of the most striking aspects, according to the confidant, was the detailed attention to timing. Every step outlined in the letter had a chronological logic, a sequence of moves that indicated awareness of both opportunity and risk. Relationships were framed as pivotal tools, public appearances as mechanisms to shape perception, and career decisions as steps toward ultimate integration into a world few outsiders could access. This was a plan that considered not only the immediate consequences of actions, but also the long-term ripple effects across social, professional, and media landscapes. There were moments in the letter that made the confidant pause. Lines describing the careful navigation of media narratives, the cultivation of allies, and the strategic management of influence suggested an almost uncanny foresight. The letter seemed to anticipate the questions, criticisms, and assumptions of the public long before they were ever voiced. It was as if the author had constructed a preemptive defense, not only for her image but for her ultimate trajectory into the royal sphere. At the same time, the confidant noticed something else: vulnerability carefully veiled in strategy. There were admissions of uncertainty, moments of introspection, and candid reflections about personal challenges. But these were always balanced with a forward-looking focus, a commitment to a plan that transcended emotion. It was both human and calculated, a duality that made the letter simultaneously relatable and unnerving. The confidant has described feeling the tension between admiration for the intellect displayed and discomfort at the degree of calculation involved. Questions arose almost immediately for the confidant. How much of what the world had seen publicly was genuine? How much had been carefully orchestrated to align with this letter's roadmap? Could someone maintain such a dual life, managing both authenticity and strategic foresight, without it affecting relationships, public perception, or self-perception? The letter suggested that the answer was yes, or at least that the author believed it could be done. The confidant realized that this was not a casual plan. It was a deliberate, comprehensive strategy that encompassed personal ambition, public persona, and the leverage of influence. Another revelation for the confidant was the attention to detail in the letter. Every move, every anticipated reaction, every potential obstacle had been considered. There were references to specific individuals, media platforms, and public events, all framed as pivotal points in a trajectory that led inexorably toward the monarchy. The confidant recalls moments when they had to pause, reread passages, and absorb the scale of the planning involved. It was staggering to see foresight applied with such exactitude, and it left an impression that would not fade. But it wasn't just the content of the letter that made the confidant uneasy, it was the implications. If these plans were executed as outlined, they could not only reshape Meghan's life, but also alter the dynamics within the royal family, the media, and the broader public. It became clear that this was a document of influence, of power, and of intent. It was a silent declaration that someone had considered not only how to enter a complex world, but also how to leave an indelible mark upon it. The confidant has described a mix of emotions: astonishment, admiration, unease, and ultimately, a sense of responsibility. Holding a document like this carries weight. There is knowledge that is both revealing and potentially explosive. How should it be handled? Should it remain private, kept within trusted circles, or should its existence be acknowledged? The confidant understood the stakes, both personally and publicly. Sharing it, even in fragments, could alter narratives, perceptions, and assumptions that had been in place for years. Even more startling were the hints of contingency planning. The letter suggested that the author had anticipated scenarios, resistance, and unforeseen events. Every step was accompanied by a backup plan, a mitigation strategy, or a countermeasure. This wasn't ambition alone. It was ambition layered with foresight, a calculated understanding of the complexities of human behavior, public scrutiny, and institutional dynamics. The confidant realized that the letter functioned not just as communication, but as a strategic manual, one that could guide action, influence perception, and preempt challenges. Questions began to press themselves onto the confidant's mind. Was this purely personal ambition, or something larger? Was this a reflection of intelligence applied ethically, or a manipulation of circumstance and perception? How could someone maintain this level of planning while engaging authentically with those around them? These questions didn't have easy answers, and the letter left them deliberately open-ended, teasing insights that could be pieced together but never fully resolved without examining subsequent events. The confidant also noticed the tone shifts throughout the letter. There were passages that were introspective, almost reflective, acknowledging vulnerabilities and human limitations. Then there were sections of assertive command, outlining goals, timelines, and desired outcomes. This oscillation between personal reflection and strategic assertion created a tension that made the letter both compelling and unsettling. It drew the confidant deeper into the author's mindset, revealing the interplay between human emotion and calculated planning in a way few could have anticipated. As the confidant finished the initial reading, the final thought was inescapable. The letter was not just about entry into royalty. It was about positioning, influence, and control. It was about orchestrating events to achieve maximum visibility while maintaining autonomy. And it was about legacy, the kind of enduring impact that outlives personal relationships, media cycles, and even institutional boundaries. The depth of foresight, the precision of planning, and the audacity of ambition left the confidant both impressed and unsettled. And then came the cliffhanger that would ensure this story could not simply end here. The letter hinted at the next phase, a transition from Hollywood influence to the global stage of royalty. What strategies had been outlined for navigating this unprecedented world? How would the author manage scrutiny, opposition, and expectations on a scale far beyond anything experienced in Los Angeles? And most critically, what was the ultimate goal, and how audacious was it? The confidant knew one thing for certain. The revelations yet to come would challenge perceptions, rewrite assumptions, and leave observers reeling. And as the pages continued to unfold, it became increasingly clear that the true depth of the plan was far more astonishing than anyone could have imagined. Have you ever read something that made you stop mid-sentence, take a step back, and question everything you thought you knew about a person? That's exactly what happened when the confidant reached the section of the letter titled Exit Strategy. The words on the page were not just revealing, they were chilling. They outlined, in meticulous detail, a plan for navigating the royal system with precision, achieving influence, and eventually stepping away with maximum control over both personal and public narrative. It wasn't a diary entry. It wasn't a whimsical reflection. It was a blueprint for strategic exit, executed with foresight that most people reserve for corporate mergers or international negotiations. From the very first lines, the audacity was clear. The letter described a deliberate approach to integration, understanding the culture, anticipating challenges, and identifying key figures whose support, or opposition, could shape outcomes. Every step in the plan was timed to coincide with opportunities in public perception, media cycles, and palace protocol. It wasn't enough to simply enter royalty. The goal was to dominate the narrative, position oneself as both indispensable and influential, and maintain control over the story long after any formal titles or roles were defined. And then came the most startling revelation. The author had considered the endgame from the very beginning. The letter detailed ways to step back from public duties, retain influence, and leverage international media attention to secure both personal autonomy and ongoing relevance. The phrasing was deliberate, almost surgical. It conveyed confidence in anticipating the reactions of palace officials, the press, and global audiences. This was not planning for love, companionship, or even traditional duty. It was planning for legacy, for impact, for control. The letter also revealed an acute awareness of optics. Every public appearance, every charity engagement, every interview was mapped against potential narrative outcomes. The author had considered how each action would be interpreted, what questions might arise, and how to guide public perception toward a favorable conclusion. Even controversies and setbacks were anticipated, with contingency plans for managing backlash while maintaining authority over the broader story. Reading this section was like seeing strategy elevated to an art form. There were moments that made the confidant pause, sentences that revealed not only ambition but also calculation, foresight, and a willingness to manipulate circumstance when necessary. It became clear that the author had thought far beyond immediate circumstances, envisioning a series of events that would span years, bridging Hollywood, international media, and the monarchy itself. The level of sophistication was remarkable, but the implications were unnerving. Direct questions arise for the audience. Could anyone execute such a plan with complete success? What does it say about the blurred lines between personal ambition and strategic manipulation? And most importantly, if someone can think this far ahead, what does that mean for every public interaction, every media appearance, and every perceived emotional moment we've witnessed over the years? The letter suggests that each of these moments could have been influenced, curated, and orchestrated to serve a larger purpose. The confidant also noted the psychological precision embedded in the strategy. The letter described ways to manage relationships, influence perception, and maintain composure under scrutiny. It acknowledged human emotions, palace politics, and public expectations, yet it framed each element as a factor to be navigated with skill rather than vulnerability. There was no room for error, no tolerance for missteps. Every action had to align with the overarching goal. A seamless rise to influence, followed by a controlled, strategic exit. What makes the exit strategy section particularly chilling is how clearly it anticipated obstacles. Potential criticisms from the press, internal palace friction, and public skepticism were all addressed in advance. Solutions were proposed, timing was calculated, and contingencies outlined. This was forward thinking at a level few consider in personal planning, and it revealed a mindset oriented toward foresight, not reaction. Every challenge was a puzzle to solve, a variable to control, a stage to manage. And yet, amid the cold calculation, there were flashes of human awareness. The letter recognized that leaving the palace would not be without consequence. Relationships could be strained, alliances tested, and public opinion divided. But it approached these realities with measured consideration, almost clinical in tone. It acknowledged emotional and political risks while framing them as factors to be managed rather than impediments. This blend of strategy and human insight created a tension that was both compelling and unsettling. The confidant remembers feeling a mix of admiration and unease. Admiration for the clarity of thought, the meticulous planning, and the audacity of the strategy. Unease at the realization that such planning existed, and at the implications it carried for understanding a life that had been closely scrutinized but perhaps never fully understood. The letter forced a re-evaluation of assumptions. Was Meghan Markle's journey driven by love, destiny, or deliberate orchestration? The answer, according to this document, leaned heavily toward the latter. There were particular passages that drew attention for their precision. Instructions for navigating media scrutiny, recommendations for cultivating allies, and strategies for maintaining influence even after formal departure all suggested a long-term vision that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. The letter framed success not as temporary recognition or fleeting fame, but as enduring impact, a calculated legacy that would leave a mark on institutions, public consciousness, and history itself. The audience begins to sense the magnitude of the plan. This was not simply about exiting a role or stepping away from royal duties. It was about securing influence, shaping narrative, and maintaining control over perception on a global scale. The foresight demonstrated in the letter bordered on audacious, revealing a level of strategic intelligence that few could anticipate, let alone execute. As the confidant progressed through the pages, one chilling realization emerged. This strategy had likely influenced every public decision, every engagement, and perhaps even every interview or statement made over the years. What seemed spontaneous, reactive, or emotionally driven might have been meticulously orchestrated. The exit strategy wasn't an afterthought. It was the guiding principle, integrated into every action and decision, a constant undercurrent directing behavior, image, and impact. And just when it seemed the strategy could not get more calculated, the letter teased what was yet to come. The next phase of influence, after leaving formal royal duties. How would the author leverage global media, partnerships, and public attention to maintain prominence? How would this plan intersect with international audiences, philanthropic projects, and commercial ventures? These questions were left deliberately open, a narrative hook that promised revelations more shocking than anything revealed so far. The cliffhanger was unmistakable. The exit strategy had been unveiled, the calculations exposed, and yet the most audacious aspects of the plan were still hidden in the pages to come. The confidant knew that the subsequent sections would not only illuminate the mechanics of influence, but also challenge the audience's understanding of ambition, strategy, and legacy. What was next? The roadmap hinted at moves so bold, so unprecedented, that they could redefine what it meant to navigate royalty, celebrity, and global influence in a single lifetime. The confidant could sense it. The revelations ahead would shock, unsettle, and leave no one who read them unchanged. How does someone step into the glare of global attention and control it almost effortlessly? That question lies at the heart of the next section of the letter, where Meghan Markle's understanding of media strategy and public perception comes into sharp focus. The confidant recalls reading passages that described not just engagement with the press, but active shaping of the narrative, anticipating public reaction, and leveraging every story, controversy, and headline to maintain influence. It was a masterclass in narrative management, a blueprint for controlling perception in an age of relentless scrutiny. The opening lines of this section immediately draw attention to the intricacies of public image. The letter describes how visibility in Hollywood had been carefully managed to build recognition, create sympathy, and cultivate influence. It then transitions to royal life, noting the similarities. Every appearance, engagement, and interaction could be amplified, critiqued, or reframed by media outlets worldwide. The writer demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of media cycles, predicting the timing of articles, interviews, and social media responses with uncanny accuracy. This was not chance, it was strategic foresight. The letter goes further, explaining how to navigate the complex relationship between private life and public scrutiny. The confidant notes that passages detail the importance of controlling what information reaches the press, how to present oneself in interviews, and even how to use timing to amplify desired narratives. There's a focus on subtlety, how to make a personal statement resonate without appearing overtly calculated, how to allow the public to believe authenticity while carefully orchestrating perception. Every move is designed to maximize impact while maintaining control over interpretation. What makes this section chilling is the acknowledgement of potential crises. The letter anticipates criticism, misrepresentation, and opposition from both the media and institutional figures. For each scenario, strategies are outlined: preemptive communication, selective disclosure, and leveraging sympathetic voices to reinforce narrative control. The confidant recalls pausing at these passages, struck by the level of preparation, the anticipation of backlash, and the understanding of how to turn even criticism into a tool for influence. It was meticulous, deliberate, and, at times, ruthless in its logic. Humor and irony are also woven into the text, providing insight into the author's awareness of public perception. The letter acknowledges the absurdity of global fascination, the contradictions inherent in being both praised and criticized, and the power of controlling the story behind the story. These reflections create an emotional rhythm that keeps the reader engaged, alternating between admiration, unease, and disbelief. The confidant describes the experience as almost cinematic, watching the careful choreography of a life unfold in precise, calculated steps. One particularly striking passage addresses the use of social media. The letter details how platforms could be leveraged to reinforce narrative, build empathy, and project influence globally. It is not casual engagement. It is a calculated tool used to shape perception, guide public sentiment, and maintain relevance across multiple audiences. Every post, comment, or appearance is positioned within a broader strategy, revealing an understanding of influence that is both modern and historically unprecedented in the context of royalty. Direct questions begin to emerge. How much of what the public witnessed was authentic, and how much was orchestrated? How does someone maintain an emotional connection with audiences while simultaneously executing a carefully crafted strategy? And perhaps most provocatively, if a person can manipulate perception at this scale, what does it say about the nature of influence, control, and narrative in our media-driven world? These questions linger because the letter doesn't offer easy answers. It challenges assumptions, invites scrutiny, and demands reflection. The confidant also recalls passages that demonstrate foresight in anticipating international attention. The letter doesn't only focus on local or national media. It considers global perception, cross-cultural interpretation, and the ways narratives could be framed differently depending on audience. This level of awareness signals not just ambition but strategic intelligence, an understanding of power that transcends borders. The letter reads almost like a manual for navigating global influence while maintaining control over personal branding and public perception. There is a deliberate tension throughout this section. Moments of candid reflection, vulnerability, and personal insight are juxtaposed with calculated strategies, contingency planning, and media foresight. This duality creates both fascination and unease. The Confidant describes the experience as gripping and unsettling, admiration for the skill and foresight displayed, but discomfort at the degree of orchestration involved. Every human interaction, every public statement, every media appearance is potentially a calculated step, a piece in a larger strategy that few could comprehend fully. The letter also addresses the concept of timing. Each statement, each public appearance, each charitable act is strategically timed to coincide with media cycles, public sentiment, and institutional opportunities. The Confidant recalls being struck by passages describing how to manage narrative momentum, ensuring that attention is directed and maintained where it will have the greatest impact. The strategic layering of actions, messaging, and timing illustrates an understanding of influence that is both modern and unprecedented in its precision. What's particularly chilling is the foresight applied to controversies. The letter anticipates criticism and backlash, offering detailed methods to control damage and even turn adversity into an opportunity for influence. It suggests that public perception is not merely reactive but can be guided, manipulated, and leveraged to achieve long-term objectives. This mindset transforms the letter from a personal reflection into a strategic playbook for influence, control, and enduring impact. As the Confidant read the final passages in this section, the tension escalated. The narrative hinted at subsequent steps: how to maintain influence after stepping back from formal duties, how to leverage media, global attention, and personal branding to remain a central figure in public consciousness. The anticipation of these next revelations created a palpable sense of suspense, as the Confidant realized that the most audacious and transformative aspects of the plan were still ahead. And then came the cliffhanger. The letter alluded to strategies that went beyond media manipulation, hinting at alliances, partnerships, and international ventures designed to sustain influence long after formal roles ended. The Confidant knew that what followed would redefine public understanding, challenge assumptions, and reveal a level of ambition that few could have anticipated. How do you turn ambition into unstoppable influence? According to the letter, the answer lies in alliances. Strategic relationships carefully cultivated, nurtured, and leveraged to achieve maximum effect. By now, the Confidant understood that Meghan Markle's rise was not accidental. Hollywood taught her visibility, the palace taught her protocol, and the letter revealed that she had spent years mapping networks of power, influence, and opportunity. Every ally, every connection, every relationship was a piece of a meticulously designed web. The opening lines of this section immediately grab attention. They describe the identification of key figures whose support could accelerate integration into royal life and amplify influence once inside. These were not merely acquaintances or casual friends. They were gatekeepers, influencers, and decision-makers in the spheres of media, philanthropy, and politics. The letter reads almost like a tactical operations manual, outlining how relationships could be initiated, strengthened, and utilized at precise moments for maximum strategic impact. The Confidant recalls being struck by the audacity and precision of this approach. Alliances were framed not as opportunistic or superficial, but as essential mechanisms to achieve specific objectives. Each relationship had a defined purpose, a role in the broader plan, and a potential to be activated at the right time. The letter even anticipates possible resistance, suggesting methods to gain trust, cultivate loyalty, and influence decisions subtly yet effectively. It is ambition executed with a level of foresight few could imagine. One particularly revealing passage discusses the cultivation of media allies. Rather than simply reacting to coverage, the author had pre-selected journalists, commentators, and influencers who could be trusted to frame stories favorably or highlight achievements strategically. The letter explains how these relationships could be maintained discreetly, ensuring that media attention could be guided without appearing manipulative. It's the art of influence disguised as genuine connection, a calculated interplay between authenticity and strategic foresight. The letter also details alliances within philanthropic and social networks. It emphasizes working with organizations, charities, and high-profile figures whose endorsement could reinforce credibility and expand reach. The confidant notes that each alliance is positioned within a larger network, connecting spheres of influence in a way that maximizes visibility while maintaining strategic control. This wasn't simply networking, it was a deliberate, interconnected plan designed to ensure that influence could be wielded across multiple domains simultaneously. There's an emotional undercurrent in the letter as well. Relationships are framed as both tools and human connections, highlighting a tension between personal interaction and strategic purpose. The confidant